Well, hi, John. Thanks very much for
Thank
joining
you.
me this morning.
No problem.
Looking to you as an expert with a great overview across the foundation industries. So I'd love to know from your point of view, what do you think the main challenges are facing the foundation industries in terms of EDI?
In terms of EDI, yeah. So I hate well, morning everybody. So for those who don't know me, I've been in the steel industry for most of my life. So although I'm talking for the foundation industries, I can't presume that I know everything about all the foundation industries, and it could be that things I talk about in steel don't actually mirror across into the other sectors. But as Christine said, yeah, I might have witnessed the evolution of EDI in the foundation industries, but I have to say very little has evolved most in the foundation sector. And it really is only over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years that there's been an increasing awareness of the challenges that we have, that exist. And I would say that actually it's only really since I left and maybe spent a little bit more time looking at that and the whole process of Transfire and listening to Sue and listening to being part of the workshop in March, just it dawns on you how little you actually know about what has to happen and what can happen. And how to make that happen. In fact, the how to make it happen, which obviously we'll come on to later, is a real challenge. But to answer your questions, Sue, the challenges are probably the obvious ones. It is in steel. It's a macho environment. It is male dominated, particularly in blue collar. And I would say only in the last 5 to 10 years that you've seen more women come into, and I'm talking gender imbalance here mainly. More women come into senior white collar positions as well. And it has been a real challenge, and I think it's a challenge that the industry absolutely has to address for lots and lots of reasons. I mean, two, for the obvious, inclusiveness that there has to be in the industry and in society generally. But when you look at the challenges that the foundation industry has, how foundation industries have overall, attracting more people, more skilled people into the industry from whatever background has to be a priority. Otherwise, we're not going to go forward. As you've seen, particularly in steel, in areas where it's I've been part of that, where we've actually, the industry scaled back significantly over the last 5, 10 years. Where there's very few people employed in the steel industry compared to 10, 20 years ago, hundreds of thousands when I started in the industry. We can't afford not to make sure that we are pulling from the widest pool possible to ensure that we can drive the industry forward and make sure the skill base is there. So, I'll continue to ramble probably a little bit as you ask me questions, because there's so much to say, and there's so much overlapping. The EDI challenges come from the wider issues of getting more and more people into the industry, attracting more people into the industry, but thereby I think lies an opportunity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, isn't it wonderful that now companies, not just in the foundation industries, but just in general, are seeing diversity as a strength rather than a tick box exercise. I think we are moving towards that, which kind of gives me hope. So kind of then to flip the question, then what kind of gives you hope really for the foundation industries around EDI?
Yeah, I think so. I've been involved, as many people on the call will know, because I talk about it a lot. And it's an initiative called Industrial Cadets, and another major challenge is to engage with young people generally, to get them interested in a future and a career in industry. When the main headlines generally you'll see in the media of foundation industries are lots of sparks and lots of steel associated with another closure or another disaster, another challenge or another crisis. So it's difficult, and also with all the environmental awareness that's around, when you're sat in the area with a steel plant there and you see steam coming out, it might be perfectly harmless, but you see that as being an environmental challenge. So attracting young people in generally has been something that the industry has had to address and continues to address. So through Industrial Cadets, which I've been involved in for a number of years now, one of the things that's really encouraged me, and it's something I think is something we ought to discuss further today maybe, is that when you try and attract young people in and you look at the balance of people you get at a young age who are interested in industry, it is good. It is what we would like to see. So I say to scribble down some of the numbers, but if you look at 2021, we had 50,000 people, young people, this is sort of 14 years and above, who took part in Industrial Cadets experience, 50,000. And 90% of those expressed an interest to pursue a career in STEM-related education, following a STEM career, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
50%, well, 47% were women in the 16 plus. So you think, well, that's great. That's a good balance. 38% were BAME as well. So you've got a good balance. It generally reflects the demographic where we're operating in, where we're actually where the industrial activity cadets activity is. So that fills me full of encouragement. That says absolutely that's exactly what we should be about. But the challenge then is, or the follow-on question to that is, well, what happens after that? So as they go through stages of their career, it just starts to fall off. It decays. So if you look at, I'm just looking at some numbers ahead of this session. If you look at the number of people in STEM-related students, and the people on the call will be far more aware of this than I am, but it already falls off by 10% by the time you get into actual education. From that sort of 14 plus people who really want to go for it, it's already dropped by 10. And then by the time you get into industry and careers, it's at best, the numbers I got from the work that research it was like 24%. But I tell you, in steel, particularly if you look at a blue collar, it's an old-fashioned term, but a blue collar population, it's significantly worse than that. So the optimism is young people, I think we can engage, absolutely engage. But by the time it gets into industry, you're losing that balance.
So for people that don't know about industrial cadets, can you just tell us a little bit more about them and how maybe people here can get involved?
Yeah, so industrial cadets, I mean, there are other schemes, but it's an accredited program whereby a young person started 10 or so years ago on Teesside in the faces of, as often these things do, in the face of a crisis, the steel plant's facing closure. And the challenge was, well, how in the face of closure and young people looking at what a future in industry might look like, one of the attractions of getting industry back to that region is to make sure you maintain the skill set. So how do you do that? So there was a discussion took place as to how we might do that, and a company called EDT, the Engineering Development Trust, which I'm a trustee for, took on this process. And to date, we've had over 100,000 industrial cadets, which is slightly different to the industrial experiences. So you can get a qualification, an accredited qualification that you can take to an employer, or you can put on your personal statement to say, like, I've followed this process. And it gives a young person experience in industry. It gives them that experience in industry, but gives them a qualification or accredited qualification at the end of it that they can use. And we're now extending it back over into primary schools, and we're going up over into 19-year-olds and into sort of undergraduate population as well. So it's a huge program. It involves hundreds of blue chip companies through the UK. I'd like to get more SME engagement than we get, but we are getting that. But importantly, there's a couple of 100,000 industrial cadets that we're working with at the moment across the UK.
Great, that's really great. And so are there any other programs that you know of that kind of link in with EDI that maybe companies and people listening might be interested in working with or finding out more about?
I mean, that's the one that I'm mostly familiar with. Other organisations, if you look at the training organisation, so if I follow through that logic, but if you go into young, if you're looking at training, then the organisations that are associated with apprenticeships, for example, it might be worth. And again, it's worthy of discussion here. And again, there'll be people on the call that know more about this than I do. But challenging that next stage, if you like, if you've got 50% young women wanting to start a career and interested in industry, then the next stage is apprenticeship or higher education, further education. So it's what's the challenge there? So I think engaging with apprenticeship organisations such as Ingenuity, the old Sector Skills Council for manufacturing, for representative areas, who do a lot with young people. They're organisations in which you could engage and have a conversation with.
That's great. Thanks, John. I think we're going to be picking this up in our panel session later on, because we've got some great experts talking to us about, more about what you need to do within your organisation to make it kind of inclusive for all, because it's not just about, as you well know, getting people into the industry. It's also about keeping them when they join, and making sure that that they feel happy and included at work too.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that is a massive challenge. I mean, you can do to a degree if you look at your typical steelworks, which has office environment, which is maybe easy to address and is a culture and environment that you can manage. When you get into a steel plant, and I used to say this to all the young people starting as apprenticeships, apprentices, please continue to challenge. Be that breath of fresh air. Come in and challenge, and if you've got a question, if you've got a concern, then raise it and voice it. How that actually happened in practice it must have been very difficult to make that happen in practice in a culture that is all about, where health and safety is massive. You've got 350 tons of liquid steel floating over your head, on the bottom of a crane hook. There are things that culture is a fairly difficult culture to break. And I think that's the biggest challenge you have. And how to do that, I think this is what this discussion is about. We talked on the March workshop, and Jo's put it in her report.
Yeah.
This roadmap, some kind of guidance. Because in my experience, I could be wrong, there isn't a lot of guidance out there on something like health and safety or disabilities. Even there is more guidance out there in that respect that I'm aware of that you could address than something that on the broader EDI, particularly around gender.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of our aims. Sorry, Don, that one of our aims is to put together a playbook, to really kind of map out exactly how to do things and what to do and how to do it. Because I think having something like that helps everyone work out where they are kind of on the sort of transition into becoming as EDI friendly as possible. And I think a lot of the time, lots of people want to do it, but actually knowing what the steps are to get to where you want to get to, they're not just out there easily accessible. So one of our aims is, as part of this project, is to put all of that together. And we've got a great speaker, Debbie Forster, on our panel coming up later, who's actually done that for the tech industry with the Tech Talent Charter, and they've got a playbook. So we're looking forward to hearing from her later and working with her on this.
Yeah.
Right, so I think Christine's going to come back in now, are you? I can see you're messaging me, Christine. Thanks very much, John. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our panel today. I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion from our pre-chats. I know we definitely will do, and lots of interesting stuff that you've got to share with us too. So maybe I'll just go around the screen in the order I've got you and ask you to just do like a 1-minute intro to yourself, so that everyone gets a good idea of who you are. So first up, we've got Debbie Forster. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Debbie. I am one of the founding group and the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter, the TTC. This is an organization, not for profit, that brings together the ecosystem to drive inclusion and diversity in tech. So we have now 700 signatories of companies of all sizes and shapes across the ecosystem. Companies, it's free to join, but they share data and best practice, so that we're able to publish annual events so people can benchmark themselves on EDI. We're now about 17% of the tech workforce here in the UK. We have an open playbook of best practices, which is why I'm here, where companies have shared with us everything from culture, recruitment, retention, growth, promotion, retraining, gender, ethnicity, social mobility, etc. So it's free and open source. So we're really excited to be working with you all today.
Great, thanks very much, Debbie. Susan, over to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Susan Bernard Lopez. I'm Professor of Structural Materials at the University of Leeds. So I have been working with the cement and concrete sector for over 15 years. And I'm also the co-director of the Transforming Foundation Industries Network Plus. So I look forward to an amazing conversation with these ladies today.
Great, thank you. Donna.
Good morning, everybody, and I'm really pleased to be with you today. So my name's Donna Hersman. I'm the Managing Director for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. Great letters and great words, I believe, for Europe, Middle East and Africa, for Talking Talent. And I have a background in working both in public, professional services and IT industry, working for myself and working for other organisations. And I also support initiatives focused on highlighting diverse talent across all sectors of life. But as Sue particularly knows, I have a particular passion for technology, which led me actually to be invited by the EU to actually present on the challenges around diversity, equity and inclusion in the tech industry. It's a topic that's been at the foremost for many, many years. And I believe it's really time now to see change and sustainable change happen. So I'm really pleased to be joining you here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Donna. Helen, over to you.
Hi everybody, my name is Helen Rose. I'm the Business Improvement Manager for NSERC. We are a glass manufacturer, or a container glass, and we also have a beverages division, so we contract pack beers, wines and spirits. The reason that I'm along today, and I feel very privileged to be part of this, the reason I'm sort of the hat I'm wearing today is that my day job is business improvement, but I also lead our Women in Manufacturing committee and group, which is a committee that we've introduced into NSERC over the last 18 months to really drive female representation, and that's about attracting women, retaining women, and making sure that whilst the women are with us, they have got an equal opportunities and fair treatment throughout the 3 sites that we've got.
Great, thank you all very much. So my first question is around the challenges. So we'll start with the kind of negative, we'll move towards the positive. So Donna, what would you are the key challenges that you've seen in your work?
I think, I'm going to cut straight to the chase. I think the key challenges are that as a society, we like to maintain the status quo, whatever that may be. And one of the things we've seen throughout history is that unless there is focused, sustainable intervention, change doesn't really happen. And I felt particularly depressed, for instance, when the World Economic Forum revised the target for equality in pay between men and women. So that's even before you get into the topic of intersectionality, because when you look at intersectionality, you can see that actually, the challenges are immense the more diverse you are. But just sticking at men v women, they've revised the target to 236 years. I can't imagine what 236 years looks like. And here we are. And as far as I know, if you look at history, men and women have always existed. So you have to ask yourself, what is it about us as a society that we don't seem to be able to get over the fact that these differences are created? And I think part of the challenge is that they start very early on in our lives. What typically do they expect girls to play with? Typically, what kind of jobs do they expect girls to go into? The men, what's the right behaviour for girls and men to be boys to be exhibiting? And so we start to be moulded, if you think about it, very early on in our lives before we're then exposed to a much wider society, which often starts at school, that begins to broaden our personal horizons. And so I think the intervention, or this view of an equal world, and I don't think it's equality that matters, it's actually equity that matters, right? Equity, that everybody has a fair opportunity to grow and expand and fulfill their potential. That's what equity is about. It needs to start really early on if we're really going to see sustainable transformational change. We have to be brave enough to intervene and to create the platform, because you can see our work's not going to get done, so that the generations that are coming can achieve this vision of total equity that I think all of us are aspiring to see in the world.
Wonderful, thanks very much, Donna. That's a great way to kind of kick us off. Susan, what are the challenges that you've seen in your career?
Oh dear, so many. We don't have enough time to cover them all. But perhaps within this forum, I will say, as a woman, and relatively young woman, working in a male-dominated sector, like civil engineering or working with construction industry, I face challenges first, I will say, to be because of my age. So I look very young. I'm Latin American, so when I get really excited, I can't hide it. So I become really bubbly, and because I try to be engaging and so on, that could be perceived as I'm not sufficiently talented or knowledgeable in my work, because we're used to that if a woman wants to be successful, we have to behave in a certain way to be taken seriously. So that's one of the things. Age has been one of the things of the barriers I have encountered, but also some of the things that we're discussing in the previous sessions. Like, for example, I'm the only professor academic within my research unit. So it's expected that if there is an EDI initiative, it's expected that I will be part of it, or I lead it, or again, I'm the only woman in at least 90% of the meetings I attend in a daily basis. So sometimes it's expected, oh, so she's the one that is going to organize, follow up in actions, taking minutes, like keeping us all organized and in place and doing things. And in many forms, I'm happy to do so. But at the same time, it's overloading an individual with things. Because then when there are these, like we talk about it, like homework type activities, like, oh, we need women in every interview. So I do double the amount of shortlistings than other colleagues, or things like that. So there are many challenges and barriers, but I will say perhaps one of the beauties, and I know that is a privilege, and that has helped me like to be shielded of a lot of other experiences, perhaps from industry, is the fact that I work in research and innovation. So because for doing a good job, you need such specific set of skills. It's very, you're looking for those skills. So you have to be open to hire the best person for the job. And that enables to create very diverse teams, very multicultural, very international teams. Because of that particular need for the work I do. But there, I have seen progress. I don't deny it. And when I start working, or when I start doing my bachelor's and my PhD, I was really fortunate that I had a woman supervisor. She was the head of school. So for me, seeing her was normal. Now I appreciate that she was the exception. But having her there really inspired many of us to be competitive and to move forward. So yes, those are some of my experiences in the workplace.
Great, thank you very much, Susan. And yeah, absolutely, role models. And if you can't see it, you can't be it kind of stuff is really important, isn't it? So Helen, over to you. What sort of challenges have you seen through your career?
So, I mean, I've been with my company for 15 years. So as an individual in the foundation industries, I kind of wear the scars of being one of few females within the business, certainly from the beginning. And I do believe that the industry is getting better, and that is reflected on in society. So we do reflect society that as different behaviours have become unacceptable in society, it's become unacceptable in our workplace. So we have come a long way. I suppose for the business and the challenges that we see, and one of them is a bit of an elephant in the room. First of all, we've got what we were talking about earlier, so the strategic sabotage. So the fact that unfortunately we do have pockets of people that are anti this, and I think another reason why, but we get very subtle behaviours. It is very, very unlikely that anybody is ever going to make that direct sexist comment, racist comment, homophobic comment, and instead to object to the work that we're trying to do. It's much more subtle behaviour. It's a very much an undermining. And unfortunately, what we find is that because they can't undermine it in the way that they want to, they can't be blatant about it. Instead, it becomes personal to people. So that person fighting for EDI is discredited. That person leading that initiative is undermined personally. And so it can manifest itself that way, which is unfortunate and obvious to some people, not so obvious to other people. And I think that a lot of that comes from, and I mentioned this to a couple of people earlier on this week, that the reasons for doing this are not to grow our workforce. We aren't looking to create jobs. Ultimately, we want to be a successful business, which will likely create employment. But right now, we're not saying that we're doing this to have more jobs. And so the challenge that we find is that by doing this, by saying that we want a more diverse workforce, inadvertently we are attacking men. We are saying that white, straight men, the days are that there are too many of them. And I think it's trying to get the message across that we're doing this for a number of very real reasons. We're doing this for the benefit of the company, for the benefit of the bottom line. And unfortunately, I think what we need to do is manage the message so that what the men aren't necessarily hearing is my days are numbered because I'm going to be replaced by some kind of diversity target. And what we've also found as a challenge is that unfortunately, and this is the bit of the elephant in the room, that when you do have a culture where you have got relatively few females, it does create tokenism. And if you have a culture of tokenism, that leads to a lot of self-preservation from the females, because if a female feels as though she is there because she's a female, she's going to protect herself, and unfortunately that can then lead to some unfortunate behaviours from those females as they try and preserve their position. So we kind of feel as though we've got a few challenges, but we're having those conversations head on, and we are addressing it as and trying to directly address those messages, mostly by just acknowledging that they do exist.
That's great, thanks, and thanks for that description. It's really interesting. Donna, you've got your hand up. I'll bring you in quickly before we have a chat with Debbie, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to highlight two things, right, which is for me the difference between diversity and inclusion. So in an inclusive world, everybody belongs. It doesn't, and I think we often forget that. So that means, if you're white and male, it's not that people are seeking to exclude you, people actually want to include you, because each of us are unique. We're all unique, we all have our own lived experiences, and that's what helps us be who we are today. But as people, we're evolving. We're not the same today that we were 10 years ago. And I think this message of inclusion is one that really needs to emphasize, because there's no point kind of creating a better world if other people feel that they are going to be excluded as a result of our attempt to create a better world. And I know it's easy to say, it's really hard to do. And the other thing a point I want to make is this issue of intersectionality. So I often get worried when the term gender is used without recognizing that there is not equality within, or if equity within this use of this word gender. So we need to go beyond visible differences. We need to look much deeper than that and find out what's happening in the way we make decisions, because we all have biases. Everybody has biases. That's the way our brain works. We have to look beyond that and think about how we can consciously focus on creating an environment where everyone can bring themselves, and that we're going to meet people where we find them. So I do worry when I hear this kind of generic terms being used, especially as a Black woman, because I can honestly say that I don't think I've ever been in an equal status with a white woman. So kind of let's kind of keep it real, and if we don't, then we're always going to have a suboptimal EDI approach.
Absolutely, a really great point there. Thanks very much, Donna. So Debbie, over to you. I don't know if you want to talk about challenges or move on.
No, but I think what's interesting is the sorts of things I would talk on, unsurprisingly, are going to draw on what everyone has said. And I think where we've seen problems, and if I look across the last 10 to 15 years within tech, The problems stem from the wrong starting point. And it's things that we've heard in these discussions. It is starting the discussion with diversity rather than inclusion. And the minute you set into that, you get into token, you get into the tick box, you get into that zero-sum game, white middle class badge, everyone else good. You get into putting people in boxes, you get into that one and done piece, where in fact, what we're seeing, and actually some companies that are coming in later in the game can make that leapfrog and start at the right point, which is, as we've been saying, this is about creating an inclusive workspace at the first. You can't fix this by hiring your way out of it. And in fact, a lot of damage is done when people just try and hire their way to fix it. Getting the culture right, where everyone has a voice and a role, that white middle class men can understand that they will have invisible lenses that will benefit from this. Whether we are looking at, if I'm looking at Donna, I'm not trying to decide, no, am I looking at a woman? Am I looking at a Black woman? It's more about how are we removing barriers so that everyone can have a voice, can have a way to succeed in order to do that. And I think it is then the next mistake we have is that people want the perfect solution and policy. And policies are important, but even more powerful is what we were hearing from Helen. It's those conversations and it's those calling out. Culture and policies hang or succeed on what we reward, what we sanction, what we call out. And so it is about creating those structures that we've brought everyone through, where white men see, if I'm a white man in the person, if I'm a white woman of privilege, I see that I have a role as a champion. I have a role as a mentor, as a supporter, as an ally to do these things, where we are calling out those behaviors, those passive aggressive pieces, and to see that that is both something that needs to be called out, but that also says we've not brought that person with us. And this is something that must be done with, not to people. And that's both the underrepresented and the represented groups. This is lots and lots. The policy, the declaration and the buy-in from the senior is essential, but that is just getting you to the starting gate. Then the real work begins of having those conversations, those processes of educating ourselves on our biases, etc. And then the other thing, and it's why I'm pleased that this event is happening, where we've then seen the mistake is, this is so big a problem. This is so huge a problem, a historical problem, a sector-wide problem. No single company can fix it. At best, we would describe it as you could invest a lot to buy a really shiny fishing rod, but you're going to go to the same leaky barrel that everyone else is. What this takes is sector-wide collaboration to change the shape of the barrel. And that will come from meetings like this to talk real talk about sharing what works. Don't treat it like a trade secret, and sharing what isn't working. What are the pain points so that you can benefit from each other? This is why things like the open playbook are so important. When we started the charter, what I hated doing, this was born of desperation and a few glasses of wine of a group of people. Insofar as, one, I couldn't bear to go to one more damn event on why are there no women in tech. I couldn't keep talking about the problem. But two, I was tired of going to events where people were spending time and money to reinvent the same damn wheel, and possibly with the same flaws as somewhere else. And so coming together to look at how do I do it within my company, but then how do we do this as a sector? How do we change our messages, our practice, our ways of doing? And how can we build on each other's innovation? Because yes, we're going to compete today for the recruitment of that single person. But ultimately, if I hire them today, Sue, you may hire them next. This is the rising tide lifts all boats. And we have to get that sense across a sector. And that's, this is where, and that's why we're here. We're going to open source everything we've got, because anything we've learned in tech, we would throw out to you to say, take what you want, adapt what you want, throw out what you want. And then the last thing is, this is not a one-off. Okay, there is that feeling of, and companies want to say, just tell me what to do. Sue, you've said before, people come to you and say, what do I do? Like you're going to suddenly unwrap the EDI vaccine and people can have it, then it's sorted forever. This is an ongoing journey. You know, even if you get your culture right and your recruitment right, then you've got to start looking at growth and promotion. This is an ongoing core principle that lifts everyone else up, that everyone wins and you get better as a company. But we have to have the buy-in that there is not a single easy solution, that you're going to make as many mistakes as you have successes, like any process within business, but you carry on the journey.
Great, thank you very much, Debbie. That's really great. Susan, so you were talking about some of the challenges. Have you seen any positive actions, any initiatives that you can speak to that you think are really making a difference?
At least in the academic sector, I think it was really positive. These initiatives that were sponsored by EPSRC, the Inclusion Matters program. It was across the country. It brought together people from businesses, from academia, to open conversations about EDI issues. And also, I was part of the Northern Power one as a mentor, and I went to several of the talks. And what was really interesting for me was to see, as I mentioned before, identify that I am shielded somehow from many of the experiences that other people with protected characteristics they have to encounter, because I'm an academic, and because of the type of work I do, and perhaps for the independence that I can handle my own work and the people I can surround myself with. So that was enlightening for me. And also perhaps the most important thing I will say was opening like a safe environment for people to speak up, because it's not easy, because it's so personal. Like, for example, today I'm talking about many things that I found really personal. And I feel uncomfortable talking about them. But I think it's important to address them. So creating like this safe environment where you can speak up about your own experience, where people validate your experience and point of view, is extremely important to start identifying the different type of actions that can happen. And actually something really interesting that was mentioned before about the stats, that we say, oh, if we have EDI stats for companies, do we think that change could happen? And in my experience, that actually worked really well with net zero. As soon as companies start being flagged as pollutants and so on and so forth, and the numbers were flashing in the newspapers, in the news, all the companies start investing on sustainability strategy, of course, marketing, because they don't want to be seen like they're doing something bad. Of course, climate change is a huge issue, but I was thinking that the idea of having some EDI stats might promote some change, because industries don't want to be seen as they're not doing anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a really good point. And it's true, isn't it? What people see of us as individuals or companies from the outside is important to us. So if it's made open for everyone to see, then of course people are going to start doing something about it. It's a really good point. Thank you. Helen, what initiatives have you seen or actions?
At NSERC, we've started to really use the data to tell a story, rather than it being based on based on a sort of emotion, which we know is something that we're already tagged with. We've started to really get deep into data, so not just looking at population percentages, number of females in leadership, but we're going a bit deeper into the data and looking at progression rates. So are the number of promotions that we've had as a percentage reflective of the female population? Have we can we see that as operational level? An operational level often gets left behind because it's a very office staff focus, but we've looked at, when we're looking at people moving through the pay grades, are is everybody moving at the same rate? So if we look at different diversity that we have within the population, is everybody channeling up those pay grades as quickly as each other? So we started to look a bit deeper at the data, and we started to see trends, and we see the trends departmentally. So different divisions perform better than others. So there must be a reason for that. So we started to unpick the data a bit more, and that leads to some quite awkward conversations. But I think actually one of the things that's having the biggest impact, and it's not even anything that's under the EDI strategy that we've got, it's actually looking at leadership. So over the last couple of years, we've really started to focus on our values as a business, and our leadership styles, and how our leaders behave within the business. Because I think that naturally, if you're a good leader, then you will naturally be embracing EDI anyway. And so the more training that we've had and the more we've rolled out the values and really embraced the behaviours associated with the values, it's starting to, people start to stick out like a sore thumb when they aren't doing that. And I think that's where we can put more attention, because then it's not drawing too much attention to individuals that are in those minority brackets. It's saying this is what a good leader looks like, and a good leader will naturally embrace EDI.
That's great, thank you. So Donna, I'd like to come to you, and what are your thoughts around leadership and EDI?
Yes, a couple of thoughts really. I think one of the challenges for leadership is that I personally don't think we should assume that a good leader will just embrace EDI, because what does embrace mean? Okay, so embrace could mean someone standing up and talking about it, but really what to me is important is what actions are they taking to ensure that the concept of equity and equality for all is being embedded in how the organisation works. And I'm always fascinated that people talk about things like hiring processes and recruitment processes. We know how to do that because, hey, people get hired, people get promoted. It's not about the processes for me, it's about the application that's being made and the decisions that are being made about who does get promoted, who does get the opportunity to do that stretch job that brings you to, makes you visible in front of the leaders. And coming back to Susan's point, you know, are you in a place where psychologically you can share your frustration when you see others around you progressing and you are not? Can you speak up when you think you're not being given the fair opportunity to show how good you are? And if you're in a minority, not a minority, but in the minority, then of course your ability to do that and succeed and have a career is actually quite risky. And so people make these decisions where they keep their voices quiet because they're having to think about their medium to long term position. And the final thing I'll say, and then I'll go on to what I see some people do to drive this more into the organisation. You know, just coming back to this issue of data, I just want to say data is only as good as the people that are giving it to you. Again, you know, if you look across, I'm going to talk about Europe because it's where I live. You know, there is no obligation for people to give you true data about themselves. So at one level, it may look like you've got a degree of data, but you need to go deeper. So yes, if women are behind, can you actually break down that data to look at some other characteristics such as disability, age, you know, clearly race, and then you'll find other patterns emerging. And so it's quite easy to look at it at one level and say, if we do this, it's going to fix it. But because we haven't really got to the depth of the inequality, all we're doing is actually sustaining the status quo without even kind of realising it. So that's the thing to watch out for. And psychological safety is a great way, I think. If you can create that, then people are prepared to give you data. I'll show you examples. I as you know, so I've been in tech world. I was the only black female, actually black executive. So there wasn't a man. I was the only person. And there was a survey and somebody said they couldn't find my answer. And I said, that's because I ticked it as somebody else, because I knew you would know as soon as I ticked the box in relation to my grade, it was me, because I'm the only one. And so this is why psychological safety is so important. But what I am seeing doing, because I like to think positives as well, I'm seeing organisations, for instance, holding executives to account by saying your bonus your salary, even your performance grade, is linked to not have you lived our values, it's linked to the actions you have taken to drive the things we've agreed. Because actually it's quite easy to say somebody's living the values. And that is really getting focus. And one of the organisations that actually been quite honest about the challenge, for instance, Bank of England, you know, they've had to come out quite honestly about the challenge they have. They've got huge targets. It'd be interesting to see how they achieve them. But part of the challenge, I think, is being really honest and saying, and then being open and saying, this is what we're going to do. We want you to hold us to account. If we don't achieve the things we said, we're going to come back and explain why. And then we're going to go again. I think it's a point Debbie made earlier on. You know, this is not a one, you know, let's line the horse up, let's get it over the line and we're done. This is a sustainable engagement to try to really drive systemic change. And I really want to get to a point where you don't need somebody like me, because it's all been done organically. But based on stats, I've still got many, many years to go, unfortunately. So can we do? I think we can. We just have to find the right levers to encourage everyone to be as committed as all of us are on this call today.
Absolutely, thank you. And Debbie, I can see you nodding a lot during that. Do you want to?
Well, I think it's
what was
really interesting for us, because we've been gathering the data for 5 years. We also have been asking companies, and what are the most effective things? So we can then cross-reference and publish lists of the most gender diverse companies say these are the top 10 strategies. The most diverse in terms of ethnicity are saying these strategies, etc. And so absolutely echoing the full range of what we've been saying here. Data, 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 data. It is foundational to what you do, but it is not a one and done, and it is not easy. So in terms of gathering the data, you do have to create a strong sense of both psychological safety and what I would be calling both safe and brave spaces. It needs to be safe for underrepresented people to be able to give data. It needs to be brave leadership to hear and act on the data. And you can't do it all at once. You can't gather all the data at once, because people have to trust you with that data. And remember what we're saying, it is as you go on the journey, it is more and more nuanced data. So it is, as Helen was talking about, not just hiring and bums in seats. It's progressions, it's retention, it's with different lenses. But I would also argue, if you're only gathering diversity data, you're not getting it right. You need your inclusion data. You need your culture data. You need that qualitative data to understand not what we're saying, but what's happening on the ground. Then, but again, you can measure a table for year upon year, and the table's not going to change sizes. So using the data is very important, and combining that data with accountability. All right. And so it is those companies who are saying, here's our data, here's our starting point, here's where we're going to go, and then looking at how that trickles through. So for example, I do like, Bank of England is one of our signatories, and they have been very brave in setting out what they've done. Here's where we are, here's why it's not acceptable, here's what we're going to do, here are the targets, here we're going to do it. And that's that brave bit. It's very hard to stick your bum above the parapet and say, not good enough, here's where we're going. But then taking it inside, Unilever, for example, had data-driven discussions with all of their managers, where they would take 3 years of data to sit down with a manager to say, and here are your choices that you made on promotion, on bonuses, on hiring for 3 years. Let's talk about what happened. And so bringing in that accountability, but bring that soft side. None of the things have to in isolation. Get the data, use the data, make sure there's accountability, but provide that training and support on how do I challenge my unconscious bias? How do I become a leader and manager to grow people? How do I create those things? And so I think that, and as well as the data, it's not just what people say when they're typing in a form. How are we creating spaces where people can talk? And that goes again to those safe spaces and brave spaces. Are we creating ways that our workforce can talk about what's working and not working, and not feel frightened, not feel that's going to penalize them? And are we equipping our leaders to be in those rooms, to hear and act on those actions. So it's that sort of piece that is then boiled into the DNA of the organization, that year on year, part of the core planning, because ultimately we're talking about people, we're talking about our talent, which is the engine house of who and what we are. So let's start investing time in it. Let's start investing resource to make sure that in the same way, we wouldn't do sales or marketing. You know what, let's have a go. Sue, can you do that on the side on Friday afternoons? And yeah, no, don't worry about targets. Let's just see how it goes and rolls. We wouldn't do something with this important. So companies that put that at the heart, use the data to drive it, but bring in that accountability are really starting to make strides.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And we're out of time, unfortunately. No, these sessions are going far too quickly for me. Thank you so much, everybody. That was absolutely wonderful. Sorry, Christine, you want to say something?
We did have just one question. So this okay. you get a chance just to answer this very briefly. What should an intervention look like?
Donna?
You know, I'm assuming, you know, you start from a point of data, but an intervention could actually be, for instance, I'm working with one organisation and we've launched a sponsorship programme to support people that, in their words, normally would not be highlighted for progression and promotion because they were always choosing the same people. And so they've been brave and said, we need to do something differently.
Cool. Great example.
Helen?
Well, I was all for pitchforks, but I'm not allowed to take that approach. So unfortunately, I've got to go for something a bit more civilized. So for us, I think the intervention again is being brave enough to stand up. And it's being brave is actually a very difficult thing, but it's actually being brave enough to stand up for the people that we know have got issues, and stand up to the people that we know are creating those issues. So yeah, it's being brave enough to have those conversations.
Susan?
I will say my takeaway from all this conversation, and perhaps a little bit away from the question itself, is something that Donna pointed out, that is equity. And that each individual is unique. We have our own personal experience, our own perceptions of our workplace and interactions with others. So we talk a lot about equality, but I think we also need to start talking about equity, and particularly when we think about foundation industries, equity, for example, in training, skills training, equity, recognizing different people's needs. Even before we start this conversation, we're talking about a flexibility of work, and Debbie just shared some amazing experiences and how that really worked for her team. So I will say it's just recognizing that if a person is happy, will be more productive. So it's a win for everyone and will be more pleasant to be around that person. So perhaps what also it will be good to champion is not just equality or diversity, it's equity. Just give to the people what they need to be happy in their workplace to make your industry more productive.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Susan. Debbie, do you want to chip in quickly with the last?
I think the best interventions are actually small to start with, data-driven. They're designed with the people, so you're doing it with people as individuals, not to people. And then it's measured afterwards, because not all of them are going to work. And we tend to do that scattergun of, let's just try 1,000 times. I think that went well, don't you? And it's about really trying to be clear, what is the problem we're trying to do? Let's try it, design it with the people we're hoping to help solve the problem. And then let's ask them afterwards, did it work? That's the sign of some good interventions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So much wisdom of all sorts on this panel. Thank you all very, very much. It was wonderful. Back to you, Christine.